Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning in this fine Thursday night, live here on the Inception Radio Network. I don't know how to say it. I say it every week, but we're going to have yet another excellent show tonight. We're going to be talking to Robert S. Thomas about his book, Intelligent Intervention. A couple of announcements before we bring Robert on. Well, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com. So if you are needing some guidance in your life so that you can move forward, go to soulhealer.com where you can check out all of the services I offer. There's lots of articles and information. There's tons of stuff there. So it's worth just cruising through and looking at it. Let's see. One of the other things that I want to remind you is, if you want to keep informed of the show, please do go to the Just Energy Radio website. That's www.justenergyradio.com and sign up for our weekly newsletter. Another way you can be kept informed of the upcoming shows is to like us on Facebook. So that would be Just Energy Radio on Facebook. Click the little like button. Actually, there's a link on our the Just Energy Radio page. And if you are interested, if you are a listener who has been listening to the archives, you can actually access all 6 years of our archives on that Just Energy Radio site. And for the last year, we have been YouTubing all of our shows. And so you can go to Just Energy Radio on YouTube.com. I do have a little announcement that I want to make. I am setting up a new YouTube channel, even though it's giving me a little bit of fits and starts here. So it should be up by next week, up and running. And it's being called Science and Spirit Meet. And it is going to be a series of videos that I put together where I talk about things like the Nephilim and intuition and chakras and all of those alternative thought topics that I find interesting. And these are actually videos that I'm putting together for your education and information. So that will be Science and Spirit Meet at yahoo.com or at youtube.com. Why did they call those two sites so close? Because I'm always getting them backwards. Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Robert and get him on the air because we have a lot to discuss. Robert Stephen Thomas has built a rational, scientifically supported case which firmly establishes that Earth was visited and colonized by advanced aliens in remote history who co-inhabited Earth with our primitive ancestors. Modern man is a result of their historical presence and genetic enhancement. Mr. Thomas has gathered the most conclusive scientific evidence available to prove that our ancient astronauts are the missing link in human evolution. So from intelligentintervention.com and the author of Intelligent Intervention, Robert S. Thomas. Hey, Robert, how are you?
Well, I'm great, Rita. Good to talk to you again.
It's just wonderful having you on the show. I'm glad we finally got you here. It just seems like so long that we were hanging out at the Paradigm Symposium.
That was a good time.
It was. I just had so much fun. All right, not enough sleep, but a lot of fun. So let's start here. One of the things I like to do when I have a new guest on is just to get a little bit of history. So what got you started down the path of exploring ancient mysteries?
Well, probably the same thing that got a lot of people my age going was Eric von Daniken's book, of course, Chariots of the Gods. When I read that as a young man, it just blew me away. And I sensed, intuition, as you know, because you spend so much time dealing with these subjects, intuition is what precedes facts and knowledge. And once you have the intuition that something is correct or you suspect that it might be right, you begin your investigation looking for the facts. And once you accumulate enough facts, then you've got the knowledge to know that a thing is reasonable or true. And that's how it started with me.
So what was it like getting to meet Eric von Daniken up close and in person at that conference?
Well, that was probably one of the highlights of my life so far. What a great guy, and he's influenced so many people throughout the world. His ideas definitely are paradigm changing, and it was honestly a thrill. In fact, in the beginning of the book, I began with the introduction and the story that I just mentioned. About how I discovered Eric von Daniken and what an influence he had been on my research ever since.
I'm going to share this little story with you. So one of my idols, like Eric von Daniken, even though he's up there, which was like one of the reasons I really wanted to be at that conference, but it was the amazing Kreskin. And he's the one that got me started down the whole road of like wanting to do psychic work. And I got to meet him a few years ago and got pictures with him. It was so exciting, And meeting Eric was right up there. It's very cool, very cool. It's almost like going to the pyramids and getting to touch these artifacts that you've only seen in books and on TV for yourself, don't you think?
Absolutely. Of course, as we both know, Zecharia Sitchin, I've read his book approximately, I think it came out a year after I read Chariots of the Gods, and that added even more information and more areas to study. And, of course, Sitchin was one of those pioneers, too, with his, he spent so much time with the Enuma Elish, the ancient Sumerian, and learning the language and deciphering it and eventually into English. And, of course, in your book, Rita, Man-Made, you deal with a lot of these early myths that we talk about of religion. And personally, I regard the Enuma Elish, which is the Sumerian equivalent of Bible, if you will. I really don't look at it as a myth at all. I believe that was history, that just about everything that is in that book and referred to is historical, actually took place.
One of the comments that I always make when people bring up that argument that it's just a fictional tale is, why would someone spend so much time documenting something, like a Danielle Steele novel?
Good,
it doesn't make sense.
Good analogy, maybe, but that's a fun way to say it. Well, Rita, mankind's earliest memories for societies and communities all around the world are almost every major civilization has a memory of a golden age when man walked with gods, and it manifests itself in so many of our ancient religions and thinking today. But again, I think there's enough evidence out there in the world today, tangible evidence that you can touch and feel and examine yourself, that anyone with a reasonably open mind, that it looks at all of these things and the potential evidence out there to support the Golden Age being factual. If you read enough about it and the information I believe you'll find in my book, Intelligent Intervention, it's just a matter of logic from that point to see how it must have been.
Well, and for me, the kicker was finding parallel myths, finding parallel ideas in the Americas and in Australia, for all places.
Even with the Eskimos, Indian tribes have the same myths or early stories. You're right.
But, and one of my early loves was archaeology and the theory of evolution and cultural anthropology. And when you sit there and think, okay, the Native Americans were in the Americas, and we'll be really conservative and say 10,000 years ago. And the Aborigines were in Australia. Well, now they're saying, 60,000 years ago. But let's be really conservative and say 20,000 years ago. For those myths to have traveled to those remote locations says that they were in existence prior to that time, or there was some other way that they were transmitted to those cultures.
And, of course, a lot of the archaeological record that's been left around, like Puma Punku and some of the things that are just now getting more public attention, are real things that you can go and touch and see. The degree of engineering that was put to practice in some of these ancient sites is just, the establishment version that primitive peoples did these things by hauling, like in the case of Baalbek, 1,200-ton stones and perfectly aligning them, that they were cut and pulled. The amount of people that would take to do that, or even beasts of burden, cattle or so forth, and ropes, the rope alone would weigh more than the stone to attach it to the amount of people or animals you would need. Logistically, you just can't do that. And there are examples like that I refer to in my book that are just so obvious that they stand out, and anyone with any degree of reason has to recognize that these things couldn't have been done with primitive means. We had to have advanced engineering for these things to be accomplished. And in as much as they're there, where did this information come from?
Have you ever, speaking about Baalbek and those massive stones, and actually for the listeners, before we move forward, you gave a weight, but some of them are huge dimensionally. How big are they, just so people can wrap their mind around their size?
Well, the three primary stones in Baalbek, which can still be seen today, unfortunately, it's an area of Middle East that's very dangerous to travel to, so I wouldn't recommend it right now. But the stones are approximately 14 feet tall by 12 feet wide, and they're about 60 feet long, or comparable to a railroad, what am I trying to say, a train, a freight car. But they're solid granite in that case, and they weigh, as they've been estimated, almost 1,200 tons, which interprets to over 2.5 million pounds. Now, even if you do, as some tried the math to figure out how many foot-pounds a force one person or an animal can exert, it would take so many people or animals to pull or move, get the inertia to overcome and move those things that, as I said, logistically, there isn't enough room to do it in the areas that they were, especially when you have to not only move them from the quarries to about a mile, which were about a mile from where at least Baalbek was built, but then it's lifting and arranging them and putting them in place above the stones below it. That is just impossible, and I don't use the word impossible lightly. It simply can't be done without advanced engineering of some sort. And I'm talking about things really like hydraulics. You need some form of hydraulic, or people speculate about anti-gravity machines, and maybe they had them at that point. But it would take something like that, either something that we have currently or something that we haven't reached that technology yet.
Well, there are people that have commented that even with our largest cranes, moving a stone that size would be challenging.
Yes, I've read that too recently. In fact, they estimated that it would take 4 cranes to move one of those modern cranes. But the problem is you could lift one of these stones with the cranes, but then once you've lifted it up, how do you move it from where the quarry where it was cut to the place that it needs to be positioned? How the cranes move? You need some sort of a large tractor-type engine and wheels, or some way of maneuvering them, and doing that so that they're all in unison. And it can't be done again by people and animals. So there had to be something else available, and though our cranes can lift them, we couldn't lift them and then move them to another site. Now, we could build a modern equivalent of railroad trestles with steel rails and perhaps lift the stone onto the railroad car, but there's no sign in the quarried fields where this ancient structure is that would indicate that anything like that ever existed, let alone the knowledge to make it exist.
Well, and the part that I always get stuck with, one of the many parts that I get stuck with, is even for a crane to pick it up, they would have to put some kind of strapping underneath it or something to get it so that they could get it into the crane in the first place, which is a whole challenging nightmare by itself.
David Hatcher Childress just came out with a new book. I just finished it last night. And he's talking about locations in Bolivia where they have the same type of problems, raising huge monolithic stones like that. And he had an establishment engineer work out the specifics on what it would take. And it was, if you read his new book, is a good book, by the way. It's amazing what an engineer today says would have been required, even in just human power, to move it. And but not only that, the engineer says that it would take approximately 1,800 humans. But how do you then design some sort of a harness to get all of these 1,800 people in and coordinate their efforts to move this thing up and down hills and mountains and passes and over rivers, to get it from the quarry? In this case, we're talking about Bolivia in South America or Peru. It just doesn't make sense. Logically, there's no way that could happen if we can't do it with modern engineering techniques. How were our primitive ancestors, who were supposed to be one step out of the Stone Age, how did they accomplish these things?
Have you ever looked into, and if you say no, that's fine, have you ever looked into the amount of force because there's the ongoing wooden roller and sled theory, okay? Mm-hmm. But if you put one of those stones onto, and I'm going to use the wooden roller thing, a bunch of wooden stones, I would just think that it would compress the wood to the point of breaking.
Just saw a program on Science Channel a week or two ago, and they were talking about, in this case, Stonehenge, and how they might have moved some of the stones at Stonehenge, which are much smaller than Baalbek and Bolivia stones that we're talking about. And they tried doing just that, Rita. They tried using rollers, and it was only a two-ton stone. And they couldn't move it. The wood literally sheared, and the logs or pushed into the ground so much, or became so lumpy up and down that they couldn't. There was no practical way to move it or roll it. And that's with just a 2-ton stone. You can imagine we're talking about not 2 tons, but 1,200 tons. And nobody's been able to do it. And that's of course at the end of the book, there are a couple of challenges for mainstream engineering and establishment thinking, and it's very simple. Let's take, for example, the stones at some of the large stones at Pumapunku in Bolivia, and their intricate cuts. It would not be that hard to field a team of engineers, or as a summer project for graduate students at an archaeological school like at Princeton, Yale, and have them spend a summer down there and attempt to reproduce one of these H-blocks that we've seen from Pumapunku with all the right-angle cuts and interior cuts. And we know, again, the history concedes where they were cut. They came from quarries about 22 miles from where the location is, the structure. But I'd like to see it. One of these people that claim these things were done by primitive means attempt to do it today with using primitive tools. But get 50 or 80 or 100 students, engineering or archaeological, and get them down to Bolivia and spend a summer there and see if they can just reproduce one of those blocks by the ways that they claim it was, achieved. I truly don't think it could happen. I think that's what we need to do.
They don't even have to go down there.
Around.
I mean, they could just get a block. I mean, we've been watching that unearthing America? No,
Mm-hmm,
Unearthing Ancient, I don't know. It's one of the new ones, which, parts of it are pretty good. Parts of it, not so good. But they have these college students that are recreating different things using modern materials, but just to test out theories. And I think, they would be you should send that suggestion to them because they'd be the perfect ones.
Well, easier to just get them to read my book because I make several of those challenges in it, and very practical ones that aren't going to cost you. One of the problems that they claim is it'd be too expensive to do something like that. It really isn't. I mean, they sponsor trips like that. Universities do all the time, every summer. Groups of students go to foreign countries and work with ancient sites, and it really takes the determination to go to Bolivia, to Pumapunku, look at one of blocks, and take the students to the quarry where they came from and say, okay, make one. Using, copper chisels and wooden hammers
little pieces
and the
of
stones
bone
and the way they claim they were built. Put up or shut up.
Hey, no, I'm sorry. I just have to, that's my sarcastic voice. There was kind of a question in the chat room, and I'm gonna make it into a question into this conversation. What about the idea about giants in our past, and the giants were actually the ones who created these structures? Any thoughts on that?
I've read many books, as you probably have, Rita. It refers to gigantism, and I know they're supposed to be fossils. You see them on the internet all the time, the giants, but I don't know that they have been credibly verified. And I say that with an open mind because, people certainly can be, this establishment can be cynical. But personally, I'm not aware of any bones or any actual remains of giants. When I say giants, I mean in excess of 10 or 12 foot. That exists. If they do, I'd like to know about it, and I'd like to study more. But I can't answer that question myself.
Okay, but they were asking in the chat room, But I mean, but you've heard the legends that like Sacsayhuaman in Peru, that was built by the giants, and the first city was built by the giants, of Viracocha, and there are a lot of myths that do say that, even though we don't have any evidence. But then again, we don't have any evidence of like these alien people, particularly. Not that hardcore evidence.
Well, we have the evidence of their work, which is close. And in terms of these types of giants, I've often thought, this is a personal notion, that maybe, again, this is a mythological reference to actual machines. The giants weren't actual human beings, but possibly robots or large construction equipment that did these things, and the native peoples referred them, or ultimately they became referred to as giants, but in fact they were ancient technology machines.
Interesting thought. Never thought of that. We've been kind of talking about some TV shows, and so I'm going to stay in that genre here for a minute. But they're and I'm sure you watch all of them like me and talk to the TV set.
No, I TiVo them.
Well, no, we TiVo them, and then we play them and talk to the TV set and go, "What? Did you hear that?
Exactly.
What?" Yeah, talk to the TV. Anyway, but there are a number of shows that explore how structures like the pyramids have been built. So do you agree? I mean, it sounds like you don't agree with what mainstream archaeology really puts out there.
Well, another thing I talked about in my book is one of the studies that was done by an archaeologist right on the Giza Plateau, maybe a half a mile from the site, the pyramid itself. It was done, the series was for the ANOVA program that was done about 20 years ago, and they still broadcast it occasionally on History Channel and a couple of others. But an architect attempted to do that. He built a small-scale model of the pyramid using ancient technology, and the thing was only 18 feet tall, and the largest stone was less than 2 tons. And because he did it, he claims, well, since we accomplished this, you can see this technology works, and it had to be how it was done on a larger scale. But what they don't show you in the television program, you need to know more about, is that as an example, there are different grades of limestone in the quarries near, it's not Aswan, in the quarries near the Giza Plateau where the stones came from. And there's soft limestone, which literally, really, you can crumble with your fingers. And then there's medium grade and hard grade, which are, the hard grade is almost like igneous stone, close to granite and dolomite. But most of the interior of the Great Pyramid of Giza used the mid-grade, and which is pretty hard stuff. And a lot of the casing stones and others were used with the fine or hard grade. And you can't. What they don't show is that the group of people that cut these stones or blocks out of the quarry used steel tools. They used steel lathing and steel chisels, and they pulled them out with front loaders, modern diesel front loaders, and they put them on semi-trucks and moved them around. And when they got them to the site and unloaded them, they didn't show the trucks, of course, during the program, but that's how it was actually done. And then they showed you, I've seen this program 2 or 3 times. It's really a hoot if you understand what's going on. But they tried to push and move a half-ton, 1,000-pound stones up manually, and they couldn't do it. I mean, but they had several. I think they had 18 people, but they couldn't even move the smaller stones up and arrange them properly. So Leonard is the archaeologist, Mark Leonard, who did that program. And you have to respect their effort in attempting to explain one of these mysteries, but explain it away and use sleight of hand and use modern tools and so forth in the background, but don't film those. If it was done by ancient techniques, why didn't they do it with ancient techniques? That would carry more weight.
A couple of years back, there was, I don't remember the name of the show, but it featured Zahi Hawass, and you kind of went on a day in the life of Zahi, and it was a little series with Zoe. Anyway, but one of the episodes, they were pulling out a stone that was from one of the temples of Cleopatra that was just outside, I think, Alexandria, and they took this boat out there, and it was a pretty good-sized boat, and they started pulling the stone up, and it almost sank the whole boat. And so and the stone wasn't all that big. In relationship to some of the stonework you see, the stone wasn't all that big. And they talk about they transported them on these reed rafts down the Nile. And I'm thinking they couldn't even get it on this boat without sinking the boat.
The challenge, you see, you have a challenge right there. Have a group of Egyptologists take an 80-ton stone, and they're lying around everywhere, and have them put it on a reed boat and see if it floats. I say good luck to that.
I'd want to be there with my, with my cell phone filming.
Absolutely so. It's really foolish when you think about practically what they need to do or attempting to do. It really makes no sense. And that's why it's never been done. If it could be done, you can bet your bottom dollar that you would have seen it on television or at this point or explained in a magazine.
Well, one of the things that I saw just the other day was some Egypt show, and they had Zahi Hawass on it. And, it didn't say, I don't know if you saw it, but it didn't call him like Grand Poobah of all of Egypt anymore. It just said archaeologist.
Yeah, he's lost, if you've been keeping up or read, he's since the Mubarak crisis and the new government taking over, Zahi Hawass, I don't want to confuse the two names, has lost a lot of respect in Egypt and with the government. They claimed that he was involved in sending many of the treasures or collections of Egyptian treasures off to museums and for people to see, small museums, but they never came back. And he's been I don't know if he's been actually indicted or brought to trial. I don't think that's the case, but there's a lot of question about the ethics that were involved in many of the things that he did when he was in charge of Egyptian history.
I still kind of like him. I don't know why.
I do too. He's got a charismatic personality, doesn't he?
Yeah.
That's the problem.
So we talked a little bit about Egypt, and the pyramids and the stones, and you've also mentioned Pumapunku. If you had to pick, which do you think is more technologically challenging, or was more technologically challenging?
Well, another name I should mention, which shares both of these locations, is Chris Dunn, as I'm sure you've read. And if you haven't had him on your show, he'd be a delightful person to have on. An engineer, and he's worked with these sites and written 2 excellent books. But Chris has actually found the saw marks and the teeth marks from high-speed tools and drills and saws that cut a lot of the stones on the Giza Plateau. And he's examined them, and the only way you can reproduce those are with high-speed or high-technology instruments. And Chris written 2 very fine books about it. And that's even some of the very large statues of Ramses, the Ramses statues, the real colossal ones. He's actually has filmed, and when his second book shows, detailed photographs up close of the cut marks that are made by large tools. But Chris has done the same thing at Pumapunku. But back to your question, of all of the locations on Earth, that ancient locations that exhibit advanced engineering, to my mind and from everything that I've read and studied, it's the stones at Pumapunku and near the shores. I hate to say it, it's almost Titicaca, which is, I wish they made a different name for the lake, but anyway, that's what it is. But it's that site, that location to me, and the technology involved in cutting the H blocks has got to be the most advanced, I think, that we can see with our own 2 eyes in a museum anywhere in the world. And that's including the Antikythera device, the Greek device that they found. The one I'm talking about. I think it's called the Ant. Yeah, and things.
It would only be really cool if it worked.
Yeah. Well, it did work. It did do something. We don't know exactly what it was, but it had remarkable potential. But I think the H blocks at Pumapunku are the number 1 finest evidence in the world that an advanced engineering was put to practice in remote history, and we need to identify. As I maintain, there's a missing chapter in human history, and that's kind of where we started out tonight, and that is this idea of the Golden Age. I believe that I know in the Gnostic sense from all of the many books that I've read that there was a time when gods, as they refer to them ancient aliens, were actually ancient aliens, an advanced culture that came here and co-inhabited our planet, that they were here. The evidence is all over the world, and it's in all of our books. It's just simply a matter of people being open-minded at it and looking at these subjects, reading and studying more about it. And again, I maintain if you do study all that's out there on these subjects, any reasonable person must come to the conclusion that there was an advanced technology and civilization that existed on Earth in prehistory.
So when you place them on the planet, how far back do you go?
Well, I don't see anything that refutes what Sitchin proposed in his book, 12th Planet, and his subsequent books that claim the Enuma Elish based on dating. Excuse me. His idea of 440,000 years ago, they first arrived, seems reasonable. They spent time here on the planet as a small group, and then ultimately the mining needs and requirements of whatever projects. And I don't look at it as like Michael Tellinger probably does, it's just gold. I believe that it's probably many of the minerals in southern Africa that they were after, diamond included. And I think that's why they were here for a long time. They were sharing them with their home planet, and there were resources that are valuable and are not that prolific in the universe. There are only certain types of rocky planets like us here on Earth and Mars, and perhaps some of the asteroid belt that's between Mars and Jupiter, where they can be found. And and whether that the Anunnaki, who were is Sitchin named, or it's actually what the Sumerians called this group of people who came, whether they appeared on Earth or made trips here prior to that, or another race of intelligent, advanced peoples prior to that, I don't know. It seems to me, Rita, didn't you just post some things about some objects that were found 3 or 4 million years ago? Did I just recently see that on Facebook?
Yeah, I just posted that today, and that's where I was going to ask next was, are you familiar with Michael Cremo's work, which I'm sure you know who Michael is.
Sure, and read his books. Mm-hmm.
And he puts dating back millions of years. I mean, I put dating back millions of years. His is more based on these weird artifacts that have been found. And actually, I'm going to just tell you my little opinion is that I think that rulership, quote unquote, got passed on to mankind at around that 440,000 years ago. But my opinion is that they were here even before that. And then when I see articles like that one that says, it's 430 million years old or some really excessive date, it just seems like it supports that kind of number.
It wouldn't surprise me at all if, I think though we claim we don't know it, intuitive, I think many of us do know it, there has to be intelligent life in the universe. The odds against there not being there and being a common thing really are too infinitesimally high for it not to be there. So if there are other advanced peoples out there, it's more than reasonable that they could have visited Earth many times. They may have come back and helped after some of the natural cataclysms that destroyed the dinosaurs, and maybe helped with the repopulation of Earth in earlier periods.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So when you talk about the Anunnaki, are you just thinking it's one group? The whole Enlil, Anu, Enki group, or have you kind of expanded out of that? Because let me frame it in a different way. There are the UFO enthusiasts who talk about the Greys and the reptilians and the Nordics and the praying mantis people. I don't remember what they're called. Which obviously, or to me, seem like different races of extraterrestrials. So do you just use the term Anunnaki as like those guys that don't live here, or are you using it more to refer to a specific group?
I'm familiar with the ideas that you're talking about. For me, in my research over the last 40 years, I've read more about the potential for ancient astronauts or ancient UFOs. That's all they had here. And I've studied and spent more of my life studying those subjects. Now, of course, in doing that, you become familiar with many of the things that you just talked about, like modern UFOologists would discuss the different races. I just have not seen enough evidence in my life, or that I've read, hard evidence for the existence of these different races. I know that and I hope I'm not disappointing a lot of your listeners too in saying this. I'm not claiming that they're not there. I'm just saying that personally I don't have enough knowledge for me to be a skeptic in this respect. I think the situations at Rendlesham and of course the Phoenix Lights and of course our most famous one in what am I talking about? Roswell. Those 3 instances are very, very interesting, all 3 of them. But I look at that as being the best evidence for existence of these different races. When I refer to the Anunnaki and the Anunnaki legacy, I believe this was one group, and as you said, Anu was a leader, whether he was a composite leader, from their old planet, or, here king, here acting king here on Earth, or what, I don't know. Sitchin has a lot to say about those things, and I think he's probably close to the truth. Everything else that I've read about, I've read the Enuma Elish, and it does square with most of it with Sitchin's thinking. But I believe that personally that the Anunnaki were a group, an indigenous group, and did have a post compounds here in Earth, and did genetically manipulate our ancient ancestors about 200,000 years ago, and that the most recent innovation or a recent exchange that makes up modern humans or Homo sapiens, you and I, came from the direct breeding of the Anunnaki, who were a distinct race with humans that they had actually genetically manipulated. And that's where, I think you refer to it in your book, Man-Made, as well. It's where the Nephilim, they've been called, or demigods, were half Anunnaki, half human, came from. And I think that their blood actually flows in the veins of all people alive on the planet today, and albeit in reduced quantities.
Well, I don't call them the Nephilim. I call the giants the Nephilim, and the byproduct of that untoward union, the children of the gods, the demigods. But
let me interrupt you just for a second. I don't like to do it, but there's a good point there. You know, I've read many different versions of this idea of what the Nephilim are and the idea of giants. I don't think it was Sitchin, but I've read some other people. I don't remember who it is. It's Robert Feather, who's a Old Testament and Dead Sea Scroll scholar, had been referring to ancient Hebrew and indicated that Nephilim actually represents not necessarily giants, but giants, meaning giants physically, but he called them, one of the earlier transliterations of the Old Testament, called them men of renown or people of renown, meaning that they had high stature. So the word Nephilim actually meant a peoples of high stature, not necessarily physical height. Although they may have been a little bit taller.
Are you sure you're not talking about the translation of the word Geborim, which is also in there?
Oh, I lost you. Sorry, I thought you said Nephilim.
Well, no, I mean, because the way that quote goes, because I just, I release my new little video, The Truth About the Nephilim. That's why it's like right there in my head. But the men of renown, that word supposedly, because I don't speak Hebrew, I barely speak English, was Geborim, which meant men of renown, men of stature, heroes, which were the byproduct. Anyway, we could go around and around on this debate because there's so much material that claims that they're the offspring, and I don't agree personally. But anyway.
Good. I'm glad it's interesting. Go ahead.
Well, you'll have to watch my video. See, and anybody that wants to see here, I'm going to give myself a plug. I have released a new video. It's right now on the Just Energy Radio YouTube page. It's called The Truth About the Nephilim. Got pictures and music. It's really freaking high tech, and I made it myself. Check it out. Anyway.
I will for sure.
Oh, there was a question I was going to ask. Wait. Oh, I know. So do you think... Or what is your opinion? Do you think they actually did like genetic engineering where they manipulated our DNA kind of like we're doing that and cloning and artificial insemination? Or do you think it was really because of this interbreeding that happened?
I think it began, and again, Sitchin makes it clear. And if you read the actual Enigma list, now I'm not talking about Sitchin's transliteration. I've got two copies of the Enigma list, and they're both written by people who are very conservative. But if you read it with an open mind and read between the lines, it appears to me that the first people that they created the stock breeding stock was Homo erectus, and they just wanted to make it a little bit more intelligence to help them with their mining and chores in their colonies. And they experimented 2 or 3 or 4 times with these, and that accounts for some of the missing links that we call between us, Cro-Magnon, and Homo erectus. And the folks that I'm having trouble thinking of the name of we shared the planet with them for a while. A little more Neanderthals. The word Neanderthal just skipped my mind. Neanderthal was probably one of their creations. but Neanderthal may have proved to be too brutish or not intelligent enough to work with, and so they eventually, many of them got loose and migrated throughout Africa and mostly Europe, where the remains are found today. But eventually, at some point, they arrived at, through genetic manipulation, something very close to our us. It would be Homo sapiens sapiens, but they were not perhaps quite as intellectually advanced as we are today. It was the actual intermingling, mixing of genes directly that created Cro-Magnon, which we are today.
I agree. The intelligence, whether they were smarter than us or not, that might be a matter of opinion. I don't know that we're all that smart. So,
looking at what we're doing on our planet, to our planet.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I'm going with it.
Yeah.
We're book smart, maybe not smart.
Right. One thing, I know that you've had a couple programs, haven't you, recently with Michael Tellinger? And I like his book, too.
I had interviewed Michael Tellinger when his books first came out. I love Michael. Met him in person a couple times, gone to a couple of his presentations. Wonderful guy. What do you ask?
And we're on the same subject, and actually my thinking about how we got to the stage we are today, humans that is, and Tellinger's are exactly the same. He uses the classic interpretation that Sitchin arrived at, and so we're in complete harmony on that. But it's not a criticism, but the one thing that I disagree a little bit with Michael Tellinger on is I don't know that the Anunnaki were necessarily as what's the word that as violent as he seems to make it in his book or his explanation that they were they weren't as regressive as we can be, humanity can be today, or it has been throughout our history. And that's one thing I don't know if when they created us as a slave species, as he's indicated, and I accept that their part reason for doing this was as sinister, as Tellinger tends to feel. I think I wouldn't necessarily call it altruistic, but they had a practical reason for doing it, creating us, and it's hard to judge the actions of history by modern standards, and living today in a modern world as we do, and a modern liberal world specifically, we look at these actions now today as something that would be reprehensible. But I'm not sure that they were.
Well, and that's why I like to change that phrase from slave species to domesticated.
Love it, yes. That would be, we're saying the same thing. You said it in a very interesting way.
But Sitchin basically said that we were a slave race. We were designed to do this stuff, but, we breed horses to do things, and we breed cows to have more body fat so they can have good marbling.
Well, sure. And if the Anunnaki were as intelligent as they must have been to reach here from another part of the universe, or solar system, not solar, I don't think they came from our solar system, but it's one of the areas I disagree with Sitchin. I don't believe the 12th planet is a member of the Sun solar system. It just doesn't seem reasonable to me. That's one area I definitely disagree with him. I think it's more likely that the Anunnaki came aboard a vehicle of some sort from another part of our galaxy.
So do you go with the whole Nibiru thing, passing by the Earth every 36,000 years? Or, what's your feeling on that whole thing? And if that's not what you think, then where do you think they came from?
I believe that Nibiru probably was the Anunnaki's home planet, but that the means of coming to Earth and traveling to Earth was an interstellar vehicle, probably a mothership, and that was the thing that came here to Earth on a 36,000-year basis, and 3,600 year basis.
Yeah, that.
And if you look at time dilation, and that's one of the things I mentioned in my book, there are a number of very practical scientific reasons that would explain the time difference between the amount of years on Earth and time that it would take them to return back to Earth, being such a long time of 3,600 years. And time dilation easily explains that.
So explain it to me. Explain it to the listener.
Sure. Einstein, one of the consequences of Einstein's theory of relativity is that the faster matter moves, the more time slows down. That's difficult to get your mind around, and it was for me for many years, still is. But in one of the sections of my book, as I describe this, a good example would be if you have a pair of twin brothers, and they both are in the space industry, and one is a mission control operative. He works here on a base on Earth, and his brother is an astronaut, and he climbs aboard a spaceship over his Earth. And if we had the means and available to make the ship go faster and faster and faster, as it approaches the speed of light, time actually slows down for the brother that's aboard the ship. Now, if they both were wearing watches when the ship took off that were synchronous and had exactly the time at the same time, as the astronaut brother began accelerating in speed, his watch would literally slow down and time would slow down relative for him to his brother. So that once they turned around and made the ship back, if they got to extremely high speeds close to the speed of light, he could come back and find that his brother was 100 years old, or perhaps had passed away. 200 or 300 years would actually have passed in time. Now, that's not a hypothesis. That's accepted science today, and it's been proven through repeated science many times. And one of the best ways, or best tests, there are several tests that they've done it with, but the most interesting one is that they took modern hypersonic aircraft, jets that the Navy or Air Force would have, and they put atomic clocks one on a plane and one on the base that it left from. And the plane took off with one of the clocks aboard it, and it went to Mach 3 or 4, is whatever they're capable of achieving today, for several, an hour, 2 or 3, whatever to travel. Turned around and came back at the same speed. And when the pilot landed, they compared the atomic clocks. The clock aboard the plane has slowed down significantly as compared to the one that was at the base. And that's a test that has been run and rerun for 20 or 30 or 40 years. So as hard as it is to understand that concept of time dilation, it is a real consequence of physics. And it is proven science. It's science, not science fiction. So if you understand that, and admittedly it's difficult, you could see how a ship that was coming to Earth to pick up minerals, gold, diamonds, whatever they needed in their home planet or in their technology aboard their ship, came here and then traveled away from the Earth and had hit very high speeds. By the time it turned around and came back, a lot more time would have progressed for the people here on Earth waiting for the ship, as opposed to the people on the ship that had made the journey. That's a lot of talking, but
that's okay.
It's one of the fascinating parts of physics.
If you had to guess, or based on your research, any thoughts on where they might have originated? I mean, you said Nibiru, but are we talking a star or a constellation that we're currently familiar with, like Sirius or Orion or the Pleiades or any of those kind of places? Or are we talking about some place that we really don't know?
It really comes down to physics, and particularly quantum physics, Rita, and what kind of speeds, mass can make and return to. And it's possible that their home planet, and it could have been somewhere just outside our solar system in a nearby star, or it could be in the middle of the Milky Way galaxy, or it could be from some other place in the universe. Quantum entanglement, as we know today, is the secret to moving objects, literally like in the Star Wars movies where they get in their machine and they move instantly from one place to another. What was that machine called? You know what I'm talking about?
What? Not in hyperdrive?
Yeah, but that'd be another form of it. But they had a machine available that the Spock and all the people would get into, and they would beam them. Yeah, and they'd beam them to.
Oh, I'm still waiting for that technology. People are like, "Oh, I want this ship that'll get me all these places." It's like, I want a teleporter. I just want to go to my little ring in my garage and fly my atoms across the country.
We have working teleporters right now on this planet, and this is not science fiction. It's being done at University of. Oh golly, I could dig out the names here, but the scientists and the group that have been doing it are on the Danube River, one of the major universities in Germany, and the physicist that's conducting, and I've been doing it for 20 years or so. I don't have his name right at my on the tip of my tongue, but not there. But they have literally been taking particles of an atom, like photons and electrons, and that are entangled pairs. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with the concept entangled, but basically it means that you have a pair of objects or tiny pieces of matter, and that if you separate them and do something to one, the other pair will automatically adjust to whatever it is that you did to the first piece. We probably don't have enough time tonight on your show to touch on or to explain entanglement, but I want you to know that it's something that's being done today in labs on the Canary Islands. There's another couple places. They've done it in Switzerland. They've done it in Germany, and they literally can take carbon molecules and put them in a chamber and in one place, and a computer breaks down the chemical composition, and it instantly sends it to a receiving chamber. Could be miles away. In the case of the Canary Islands, I believe they're like 122 miles apart. But they put it in one chamber and read it. The computer reads it and sends it, and it disappears from one chamber and appears in another 122 miles away instantly. And that's not science fiction. That's
we need to go
right
take
now.
a break.
And it's a matter of time before we can do that with larger objects. Like, I don't think we'd want to try putting a mouse in there just yet, but eventually I believe that it looks like science will be able to do that from the laws of quantum physics that we're seeing.
Well, and Robert, we need to take a quick break. But on that note, what you made me think of was The Fly, and how he got the fly material from transporting in and out of space. But anyway, we need to take a break. The music should be here, or I don't know, sometimes I can't hear it. So I'm just going to make believe I can hear it. Anyway, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to Robert Thomas about his book, Intelligent Intervention. His webpage is intelligent.
And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
And welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. We have been talking to Robert S. Thomas about his book, Intelligent Intervention. His webpage is www.intelligentintervention.com. But I want to remind you that Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can go and get information about all the products and services I offer, including intuitive guidance that can help you move forward in your life. Don't forget that if you sign up for the Just Energy Radio newsletter at justenergyradio.com, you can be kept informed of all the upcoming guests like the programming we have today. Or you can like us on Facebook and actually on the Just Energy Radio website. In addition to having 6 years worth of archives, there is a link that will take you right to our Facebook page, and you can just click the like button. How easy is that? If you're interested in listening to the archives, I mentioned the Just Energy Radio website. You can listen to them here on the InceptionRadioNetwork.com site. Or you can check out our YouTube channel, which is Just Energy Radio. And I mentioned this in the first hour in case you missed it. I am launching a new YouTube channel called Science and Spirit Meet. I just set it up today, but it's not showing up in the YouTube search thing, and I only have one video on there, but it will be increasing. And these are going to be videos that I'm producing, like the one that I posted up there is the truth about the Nephilim. But I'm working on some other ones, and they're just informative, anywhere between 5 and 15-minute little shorts with pictures, and they came out pretty cool, even if I say so myself. Anyway, let me get Robert back on the air, and we can continue our great conversation. Hasn't this been a great conversation so far? Robert, you still with me?
Really enjoyed it.
Well, we have a whole other hour. Hope you got some water.
Time goes fast when you're having fun.
Yeah. So we were talking about the origin of life and alien intervention into the genetic makeup of life on Earth, or Homo erectus, and evolving Homo erectus forward into modern man. But how do you think life got started here on Earth? I mean, do you still buy into the whole, 2 amino acids kind of hooked up and they got hit by lightning and then boom, life started?
No, not at all, Rita. And of course, that's neo-Darwinism. And though I'm personally, from everything that I've read, no doubt that Darwinism is a science. There's a couple of elements within Darwinism that don't make sense, and one of them happens to be the initial beginning of life on our planet about 3.5 billion years ago. Exactly what happened, and the idea of proteins forming and turning into amino acids, and several of them just suddenly coming together because of a lightning strike or something, and creating the first living cell, reproducing cell. If you begin to look at the chemistry and the biology behind the complexity of any living cell, just the most basic one, it is just impossible for those things to happen. I mean impossible. Statistically, it's infinitesimally small that it could ever happen. And though I respect people like Richard Dawkins and other atheists and people that use this as the idea of spontaneous life as a cause for life appearing on Earth, I don't accept it, and it logically just doesn't make sense. So that's a long answer.
Well, this is one of my husband's favorite quotes when you talk about evolution and that whole thing. And now it doesn't help that he's fascinated with airplanes, but this is Sir Frederick Hoyle that says that statistical analysis of life on Earth beginning this way are about 10 to the 4, all right, I have to kind of put a comma in here, 10 to the 40,000th power. And then his quote says, the chance that higher life forms might have emerged in this way is comparable to the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 from materials therein.
I've read that before. It's a great quote, and I love it. And it really hits a nail on the head. It's just the possibility of all those things coming together by chance aren't reasonable. And, it's something that just average folks, like myself, I just learn these things by reading books by physicists, Irvine Laszlo, Jude Curvin, Bernard Heish, Frank Wilczek, Brian Greene, Stephen Hawking. And when you read them and understand the complexity of a cell, and not just a cell, but a cell, it's another analogy, Rita, I used in my book. If you took the first living cell, which was in fact the basis of all life on our planet, and look at that. When we see a picture in a biology book, it's just a line drawn and around looks like a bubble with maybe a couple of whiskers coming off of it. And it looks very basic. And through a microscope, it looks very basic. But that's because they're so tiny. If you could take that cell and blow it up to the size of, let's say, a porpoise or a dolphin, and put it in a pool next to you and walk and look and observe it, you'd realize how really complex a living cell is. It's got a skin. It's got an exoskeleton. It's got a nervous system. It's got a system for taking in food and ingesting light and turning it into energy and moving, and appendages to make it move. And it's so utterly complex that if any one of those things were missing in that first lightning strike, the cell would not have gone on. But even behind that, within the cell, each of the components of the cell are also made up of DNA. And a strand of DNA, which we know is about 27,000 pairs or couplings, and has a potential of diversity to a power in the billions. And when you look at the complexity behind the most basic life form, for that to have all just happened, it just doesn't pass the smell test for any reasonable person, I believe.
So we have a question in the chat room, and it's kind of a multi-part thing. And so it's from Jamie. And Jamie, I'm actually going to pick two pieces out. First part is, does he think the Bible's time clock is different than what we think? So how does the Bible, the chronology given in the Bible, fit into this? I'm just going to kind of make up my own question out of that. And then how long do you think that tech-smart humans have been here?
Let's take the first question first, the Bible and Exodus. And not Exodus, Genesis, the first chapter. Actually, if you read that literally and look between the lines, the way God created Earth in 6 days and 6 nights, and the order of things and the way that they happen, and compare that to what we know in cosmology today, there's an amazing amount of information in there that's correct. And I maintain that the information in Genesis is correct or given to us from the Anunnaki, and we just later changed it and got the order a little confused as it was recopied. But there was a darkness, and then suddenly there was a light, but not the kind of light that we see today from a star. But thinking was next, and then the formation of atoms, and then they condensed into stars, and stars produced the visible light that we see. And from everything I've read, it makes sense. Or if you read Exodus, I'm sorry, I keep saying Exodus, I mean Genesis, and read the order of things. You got a
Moses complex going on today, Robert?
Yeah, there you go. It's accurate. It's very accurate. In the Bible, the only mistake is they have the seeds and trees and grasses on the earth appearing on the third day, and then the following day came the sun and the moon. Now, of course, that doesn't make sense. We know we can watch today through our orbiting telescopes the genesis and the formation of solar systems throughout the universe, and we can see that it forms first from the sun at the center, and then the planets are formed after that. So we can know clearly, science knows without a doubt, that the order, that order of things happening in Genesis is not correct. But other than that, Genesis is a remarkable amount of science in there. The other thing, of course, that you alluded to, Rita, was the dating. And the idea that the universe is...
Can I just interrupt you real quick for
4004 BC and September 26th is,
it was a Sunday. But can I interrupt you one quick sec before you move on to this next piece?
Sure.
Reserve your judgment about there being a mistake in the Bible. Because. I have a very big because other myths from around the world also put the plants and trees happening before the sun and the moon. It's not just the Bible that reports it in that chronology. Weird as it is, and what that means, I don't know, because that was my initial thought, but that's not what you find, mythologically speaking.
What are those sources, or is that one of your callers that brought that up, Peter?
What, it being out of sequence?
Yeah.
Read my book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. I go into a whole thing about it because it doesn't make sense. There are multiple myths that have them basically terraforming, and trees and plants and mountains, and then they put the sun and the moon and the stars, guys.
Well, I read your book, and I don't recall that part. Shame on me. That's something just got around me. I'll have to go back and reread that section. But do you recall, Rita, the sources for those other than Genesis, where that came from? It was like Sumerian or Babylonian?
Oh, I mean, they were from all over. Actually, I'm flipping pages right now.
Mm.
I don't know. I don't really want to spend a whole lot of time looking, but it was in the chapter of Conquest Planet Earth, chapter 11.
Well, I just made a note of that. I'll reread it tonight.
But yeah, because that was just really bizarre to me, and that was one of the comments I made. It's like, well, there has to be a mistake. I mean, earlier in the book, I'm like, they made the plants and the trees, but plants grow by photosynthesis. Thus, no light, no plants. Pretty simple. But no, I know that it comes out of Native American cosmology. I mean, that part I do remember off the top of my head.
Mm.
So, I mean, because that was one of my big things, was that I needed to find parallel stories that came from not just, if it was Greek and Sumerian, really close, but if you were starting to give me Aboriginal stories and Native American stories that were parallel, to me, that was validating there is something going on here.
Well, I can't imagine what it would be, but so I'm going to do some more research because, as I said, you piqued my interest and curiosity. So thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, but the other part, hang on, let me back up. How long do you, we were talking about the Bible timeline. That's where I kind of interrupted.
Mm.
In the 4004 BC.
Oh, we certainly, we've got the fossils from creatures that lived, they've radiocarbon tested to live long before that, the dinosaurs, and, life goes back about 3.5 billion years. We know that. 3 billion years, I'm sorry, to the first. And today you can take many areas of the planet where you can start digging down and go from the current surface down to 3.5 million years ago. And when you take those areas and dig through the sediments and examine what you find, you can find the most complex creatures at the top, the most recent. And as you go down lower and lower, the forms of life become, less and less evolved. And the idea of Darwinism being a correct science in that respect is pretty hard to deny. But so too is the age of these things, because we can test them conclusively today, and we know that we had life on the planet 3.5 billion years ago. The first cells appeared.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty well established.
And then, I scrolled and now I lost where I was. And then how long do you think tech-smart humans have been here?
What is the word tech-smart?
Tech, like in high-tech?
Oh, tech-smart. I believe, personally, or I hate to use the word believe because I really say it this passionately. I know from what I've studied that there was advanced technology put to practice thousands and thousands of years ago, at least certainly back to 24,000 BC, maybe earlier. Or further back in that way, but on a timeline chronology, I would say that. But I would think that technology was basically used by the Anunnaki. That's the Anunnaki legacy, and the simple Cro-Magnons that we are today. We may have had help from the Anunnaki with some of this technology, but I don't think they taught us it or the fundamentals behind it. It's something that has evolved naturally since they left the planet.
But see, one of the things that I've always considered, and I'd like your thoughts on this, is how did we develop eyes? How did we do, like they say, oh, it's the survival of the fittest, but there are certain things that happened in our evolution that just seem inexplicable.
Well, I'd recommend Michael Behe's book, Darwin's Black Box. I think it's one of the best books ever written on the subject, and he explains irreducible complexity and what's the other design? Intelligent design. He explains them as well as anyone. He's a great scientist, and he covers that very thoroughly. And it's just a simple evolution of the first cells that appeared, living cells on Earth, evolving to in the way that classically that we understand it through Darwin. The two problems that, as I said, Rita, that I have with Darwinism is, number one, that the first cell just was a chance one-off random mutation that statistically is just beyond possibility. And the second thing that I have a problem with is the last 100,000 years or so of evolution, particularly with human. Darwin, in all other species, it took to the process of changing or morphing into something new, a new species, took millions of years. And in the case of humans, us today, intelligent people, sentient humans, it's happened in just a little more than 100,000 years from the fossil record, at least. And how do you explain that? There has to be an outside influence, and that influence has got to be either physical, from a race of beings like the Anunnaki being here and providing it, or somehow you would say spiritual. And I would say spiritual, but we understand a little differently. I would call it consciousness or universal consciousness. Are you familiar with Rupert Murdoch and his books? Not Rupert
I know
Murdoch.
the name.
Rupert,
I have not
Sheldrake.
read his books. I mean, but I'm familiar with the concept of intelligent design. I've had one of my favorites, Amit Goswami, on several times, and now we've gotten into some hefty debates about that one. But if intelligent design is occurring, I mean, because it is definitely a theory that I don't knock, you know what I mean? I just kind of keep it over there. What would make you, other than we haven't found the missing link, but what would make you think, well, we were intelligent designed up until this point in time, and then something on the outside intervened kind of in this 11th hour? What would make you kind of change that whole thing?
200,000 years ago, the highest natural form that evolved on this planet was Homo erectus. And they basically were knuckle dragging. And I know Cremo and some Michael Cremo you mentioned earlier feels that life or some form of intelligent life went back further, a lot further than that. And there may be some evidence for that. But I would think if it was probably extraterrestrial, not, the human species that we've evolved in today. Our ancestors, I buy evolution the way it's explained. It was the Homo erectus. But then within 200,000 years, we arrived at modern humans. And that's just not enough time to make all of the changes that were necessary. And we're beginning to discover the genes that are different in humans, like the FOXP2, and that develops, I think FOX is the cranial development that determines the size of the skull and the brain cavity and the size of the jaw. And these genes are now being discovered, and we understand that they're fairly recent advents. So I'm kind of lost my place, but that's the second problem that I find. No, I've gotten found it, and that's the second problem that I found with evolution. I accept evolution basically with those two exceptions. That number one, life didn't just randomly appear in our life. It either came from morphic resonance, which is what Rupert Sheldrake, as modern scientist, talks about, or panspermia, which is another possibility. It came through space rocks from another planet or part of the galaxy, or who knows? I can't answer that. I don't think anyone alive today can answer it. But so it's the beginning of life, and then the last 200,000 years, the rapid acceleration from knuckle draggers to Albert Einstein. it's not enough time based on laws of evolution for those things to occur. 200,000 years. It's just not enough time.
Well, and I agree. I just wanted you to say it out loud. And why Albert Einstein? Why not me and you?
Well, there you go. Well,
come on. We're smart people.
Sure.
Let's turn our attention to society and culture. We often assume that humanity acts and behaves in certain ways because it's what we people are. It's what humans do. Do you think that our morals, values, and judgments were influenced by the gods?
Good question. They were technologically so far ahead of us a couple 100,000 years ago, the Anunnaki, that it would be like a modern anthropologist going to remote South America, and getting one of the indigenous tribes that are reclusive there. And how do you deal with that? Some of these tribes in Central South America are so reclusive. How do you teach them morals and laws and history? They have no interest in learning it. So I think, when humans first appeared, we were probably similar in intellect to some of the more primitive tribes that exist around the world in a few pockets. And we didn't become more intellectually involved until we began actually procreating with the Anunnaki, or the Anunnaki took human wives. And that was when, at that point, the demigods, or again, you say it a little differently than I do. I've always understood the word as Nephilim, but you pronounce it differently, Rita. But we're talking about the same thing. Well, it's because
it's two different words.
Yeah. Well, maybe.
Listen to my video. Actually, listen to the video.
Mm-hmm. I will. I absolutely will.
Okay, but anyway, where were we? Oh, so you were talking about indigenous tribes and us having, but even if you look at indigenous tribes, let me just kind of start with a different point. If you look at indigenous tribes, they still act human, and I'll make a reference point. You watch Star Trek, especially like Next Generation, and you have Worf on the Enterprise, and his morals and his culture is based on a very different principle. It's you want to die a warrior's death. You don't want to die of old age, and that is prevalent. I mean, that is the culture of the Klingon. This warrior society, where I would think even if there were indigenous Klingons somewhere on Klingonville, I don't know what the name of their planet is, but anyway,
home planet, I don't know.
Yeah, Planet X. They're on Planet X. That they would still be Klingon. I mean, even Worf, he wasn't really raised with Klingons, but he's still Klingon. Where humans, even if you are in some extremely remote area, are still human. You see where I'm going?
Well, I do. Well, I'm going to take that on in a little different way.
Okay.
I'm just about finished with my second book, which I expect to publish a little later this spring. And I deal with actually the subjects of the Paradigm Convention that was held last fall, and deal with that subject, the idea of worldviews. And during most of the 20th century, we had two competing worldviews. One was the religious and spiritual worldview, that's the ancient worldview, and the other is the scientific materialist worldview. And each have very good things about them to offer and lessons for humanity to learn, but they each have problems. So we'll leave the scientific materialist worldview aside for a second. But if you look at the religious and spiritual worldview, there are some very important lessons there that deal with philosophy and morality that we learned. And I believe personally the difference between the two, religion and spirituality, is that spirituality is 100% intuitive. going back to the first people that thought and our forefathers and ancestors. It was the ideas that came to them through their own consciousness and intuitiveness and relating it to nature and society and the things that they dealt with. And that's how the shamans and the people that led the tribes, ancient tribes, evolved. And that was through their own perception, intuitiveness, and thinking. Religion, I think many of the elements of religion came from exactly the same source, but I think religion has a second source. And that second source is a legitimate Anunnaki legacy where many of our early ancestors were influenced by the thinking and the technology and the engineering and the genetic gene pool of a more intelligent race. So that's how I think I've forgotten your original question, but that's how I was thinking of answering it. Does that make sense?
No, that does make sense.
Albeit both worldviews are a little bit confused today. But again, let's just stick with the religious and spiritual worldview. A lot of good has come from the spiritual worldview, and in terms of our intuitiveness and thinking and psi and paranormal activity, there's a legitimate basis for that human consciousness has been able to express. We don't understand enough about that yet, but we're beginning really to start to get a little bit of a handle on that today with people like the Institute of Noetic Science, Dean Radin, and a number of people who have been experimenting in those fields. I think we're starting to get a better understanding of psi phenomena. But that's one part of our history. The other part, as I said, comes from direct influence from an advanced race of beings that were here and we shared our planet with in prehistory.
Well, I mean, what's your whole take on religion? It seems like from the earliest of times, and I'm not talking about Christianity or Judaism. I'm talking, like the precursors to those. But since the earliest of times, there has always been, or at least I don't even want to say in our history, some kind of religion. There's some kind of priest, some kind of ritual type things happening. We know from like the Bible, according to Judaism, after the flood, God gave Noah laws, the Noetic laws to live by. So we know that laws came into supposedly our, being, at least as far back as Noah, but do you think it even goes back further than that? And do you think that here's a controversial one for you. Do you think that what we see as religion today is actually because of the gods?
It is actually what?
Because of the gods? Because of that relationship?
Actually, Rita, in my book, Intelligent Intervention, the longest chapter in the book, and it is a long one, is a history of all the major world religions today and some of the past. And my hypothesis is, it's more than a hypothesis, I really believe that this will be taught in schools one day, is that all of the major religions today have a root source. And that root source is the Enuma Elish and the Anunnaki legacy and what was taught to the Sumerians about 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. And that it was after that after the Anunnaki mixed genes and bloodlines with humans, and we had demigods who were half Anunnaki, half human, and then other people that have even less Anunnaki blood in their system or genetic makeup began to change what was originally taught, and that's how the Egyptian religion came next from Marduk, and going back to the Enuma Elish. And I think things that you referred to in your book, Man-Made, are there as well. So we should be in harmony on this. But the Egyptian religion and the Hindu religion are the two oldest. After the Anunnaki religion that is expressed in the Enuma Elish. But these all were spin-offs of the original story of how humanity came to be, modern humans. And then, of course, the Egyptian turned into monotheism, and then monotheism turned into Judaism, and Judaism split off to Islam and Christianity, and Islam and Catholicism. Catholicism was a product of the Church Fathers, the Catholic Church Fathers. Later, after Martin Luther King, but Catholicism split into Protestantism. I maintain there are no Christian churches in the world today. None. It's a dead religion. Christianity was what was taught by Jesus directly, and can be found in his proverbs and his parables, and that's a lot different than what became the Catholic and ultimately Protestant religions and their spin-offs. But I think the whole history of religion can be traced back to the Enuma Elish and Anunnaki legacy in their teaching. And there's a lot of evidence to support it.
And so, well, then I'm going to ask a different question. So would you agree with the statement that when we read the Bible or when we read some of these texts that the gods that we're talking about are not, creator gods, but actually these extraterrestrial
They were Anunnaki,
visitors?
no question in my mind. Anu, Enki, his sons Enki and Enlil, and their sister in India, Inanna, later is presently known under a different name. All of these were historical figures on the planet, and they were the basis of what now today modern religions refer back to. We've changed a lot of the names different cultures did, just like the Greek legends. Who is it? The head of the Greek pantheon, Zeus. I'm pretty sure Zeus. The Romans had the same pantheon, but they changed some of the names, and Zeus is something else in Roman. But many of the original 12 pantheon of 12 gods in Greek eventually were all of the same ideas and characters were taught and told. The stories were told about them, but they just changed the names and some of the situations.
And didn't even do a very good job of masking it. But the Romans were an interesting culture because they kind of didn't really invent. I mean, they invented stuff, but then they took other people's stuff and kind of like the Egyptians. They wiped it off and they put their name on and they said, "Oh, we invented this," but kind of not really. They were really good imitators.
Well, especially the Romans, I agree. There's been a lot of. It sounds like you watch History and Science Channel about as much as I do, National Geographic.
Well, actually, I have a minor in art history, and so that was one of my areas of focus. I loved Greek art for a really long time, so have read a lot about it. And then I would look at Roman art and go, "Ew, you guys are a bunch of copycats." So I got totally turned off on Roman anything.
Well, a lot of folks. It's now coming out, and there are a number of programs on National Geographic Channel as well that are beginning to expose the roots of Catholicism and monotheism. They're different than what we've been conventionally taught. And that information is, I know because you referred to it in your book as well, comes from the Nag Hammadi and comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls and a lot of the Gospels that were written by Jesus' brother James and Mary and Thomas, the original apostles, that were found in Nag Hammadi, but escaped the Catholic editors, or Catholic Church Father editors. And they're totally different. That's true Christianity, it's Gnosticism. And they don't have any of the supernatural, virgin birth and walking on water and literal resurrection. Those things are never part of original Christianity. Those were things that were added on by the Roman Catholic Church Fathers about 200-300 years later. At that time, while this was happening, the Romans had, for about 700 years, their major religion was a combination of some Egyptian legends involving Isis and Osiris and Horus. And in fact, if you happen to travel in Italy today, you'll see some of the oldest Madonnas that we assume naturally are Jesus, supposed to be Jesus and Mother Mary, actually were Isis and her son Horus, and they were there before Christianity. So that was part of the Roman religion was at that time, 300 AD, was making a metamorphosis, a change from this Isis, Egyptian worship of Isis and Horus, and Mithraism, which came out of Iran and Babylon, and Mithra. All of the original Catholic churches throughout Europe, including the Vatican City, were built on Mithraisms. The Mithraisms, I call them, they were churches that were not ground, and they conducted all of their ceremonies there. And so the catacombs below the Vatican City today are go back hundreds of years before Christianity, and were actually Mithraisms, as I said. And it's a difficult term for me to pronounce. I could spell it, but at any rate,
you're in good company on the show,
and the beliefs
Robert.
of Mithra.
I can't pronounce anything, so.
I'm sorry?
I said you're in good company on this show. You don't have to pronounce anything correctly, and it all is good.
Thank you. But the original the Roman religion at that time had been fixed for several hundred years before Christianity, and it was mostly followed by the wealthy and the military people, and they wanted to change it, and Constantinople did change it, and the early Catholic fathers, but church fathers. But to get it to change, they had to take their old religion and take many of the things, attributes that they associated with their deity, who was Mithra, like a virgin birth and born in a grotto and died and came back. All of those things were originally associated with Mithra, and later were added on to Jesus' legacy from Christianity, not Christianity, Catholicism. Yeah, maintaining Christianity as a dead religion. Catholicism took Christianity and its former religions and made it into a new religion, which was Catholicism. But again, my point in saying that, Rita, is that there are a number of shows that you can see on reputable television programming and produced today that go back and deal with this, and I've seen some as recently as the last month. So this is a chapter of our history that is real, very real, that is just now beginning to come out and be more discussed and more open, and more people, are accepting the truth of our history, our ancient history of religions.
Well, we have a great question that is in the chat room, and seeing where we are on the clock, we have about 15 minutes left. I think this is a good one to kind of start wrapping up, and this is from Orion, a very appropriate name, and it says, does the guest think we are being prepared for something?
Does the
guest, does Robert think we are being prepared for something?
Oh, meaning humanity?
Yeah. It's like as part of the alien or extraterrestrial agenda. I'm assuming that's what he's talking about. We were created, but are we being prepared for something? And then I'm going to throw in here, just as part of this, the whole concept of the second coming or them coming back, because to me, it fits in really nice. Yep.
Are we an invented species, and at some point is our future, the future of humanity, being formed or decided for us? It's a great question. Whoever
it would be
up,
Orion.
It's a good one, and you can take all sides of that. I'll just say one thing in passing. This isn't anything I can prove, or I know this is true for a fact, but I've often wondered if not the explanation for the modern UFO phenomena, and the Greys particularly, might not be that they are watchers from the Old Testament and earlier that are monitoring, our modern society, and do from time to time step in. I would also venture that they maybe have been left here and that this would account for modern UFO sightings, to monitor us by the Anunnaki, and finally that the Greys are not actually a biological species, but that they're an artificial intelligence with, certain limitations, and that they were designed basically as machines, possibly with biological skins and organs and so forth, but they're an artificial intelligence that were designed for a long, long life, and to put here specifically to monitor human activity. So, I've read a lot, and as I'm sure you have, Rita, and that's a difficult question to answer. We can only guess. My thinking would be, I think it entirely within the realm of possibility. Whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, we can achieve. And if we're on the verge of creating artificial intelligence ourselves, which we are, and it'll come before the end of this century, it's certainly reasonable to think that it's been done before, and we may not be a product of it.
Well, and I'm going to use Sitchin's dating, talking about the 3,600-year cycle. I mean, if you think about it, according to his theory, 3,600 years was one. All right, 3,600 of our years was one of their years. Mm-hmm. And if we go back in time, and I'm just going to kind of pick an arbitrary date, so 6,000 BC. I'm just kind of picking that kind of arbitrarily out there. Theoretically speaking, they've only been gone in their minds 2 years, where it's been, multiple generations here on Earth. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I guess where I'm going is, so do you think they're coming back? Do you think they?
I would hope so. I personally hope so. And I reflected on that in several points in my book. We don't know for certain. If I could pick and say, we had a choice, which none of us can, I'd say, yes, I hope they do come back to help us. My God, we've got to do something to get out of this problem and mess we've created on the planet. And we're at a point where we need some extraterrestrial help, because I don't think we're going to be solving it with, was it Einstein that said, the problems of society are the kinds of thinking that created the mess that society is in today is going to take a new kind of thinking to resolve. He said it more nicely or succinctly than I did, but it's a good point. In other words, we have to change our thinking, and I don't know if humans can do it at this point. I'm an optimist. I hope that we can, but it's an uphill battle.
Well, one of the things that I was just thinking as you were talking was, we had the whole conversation about, us being created as a slave species or a domesticated species. And, if the gods do come back, what is their attitude? You made the comment, it's like, well, I hope they help us figure this whole thing out. But if we were just kind of their little slave people, I wonder what kind of, either friction that will create, or would they come in and just make the assumption that they're in charge. It just kind of brings into this whole, interpersonal relationship question between us and them.
Let me clear something out just for a second. It'll take a minute to explain what's important. Ray Kurzweil, I'm sure you're familiar with the name. He's the guy that wrote the original algorithms for computer talk. And when we talk to a machine, it's because of science that Ray worked out. Brilliant, one of the top scientists in the world today. And he's got a great book called The Singularity. And he talks about artificial intelligence. And in that book, and gosh, I may have lost my point for bringing him up, but yes. But the idea that humanity could be made by an extraterrestrial species to come back and use as slaves or as a food source, I find that kind of thinking myself just really important. And any advanced technology that could, or advanced culture that could achieve space travel and do the kinds of things they're capable of would have much better things to do with their time to come back and eat us all. But again, the reason why I mentioned Kurzweil is he talks about, and they're building them right now, they're what are called personal fabricators. And meaning that we will be able to take basic elements like hydrogen, and they're already developing this technology now. It's just a matter of time. And people will have, just like you have PCs now, you might have a personal fabricator. And what you do is you'll have a software program, and if you want to make yourself, or you need a new jacket, let's say, or a coat, or shoes, or a salmon, or a loaf of bread. You run the computer program of how this is structured into your personal fabricator, push some buttons, and one appears. And literally, we can reduce from one atom at a time up and make things. And I know that sounds like science fiction, but we actually are on the edge of the kind of technology that we can do those kinds of things. And if we as humans in our state can do that now, imagine what another 500 years or 1,000 or 2,000 years or perhaps millions in part of extraterrestrials, what they're capable of doing.
Well, and then we can just walk up to our console and say, tea, Earl Grey, hot.
There you go.
Engage.
But those things aren't...
and I don't think they would come back. You made the point that, you would think it would be abhorrent that, this advanced species would come back and want to eat us, although we might taste like chicken, which is possible. But,
well, that would be a reason, wouldn't it?
But my concern is that they would look at us like, we were the dog or the cat, and not as equals. Not about them eating us, not really even about them enslaving us, but that we just wouldn't be equals.
And that would be in fact, I said as much in the book, and it might be another explanation for the modern UFO phenomena. Some of these, the sighting like the Phoenix Lights, they may have come back and done a quick tour of the planet and over some of the major cities and said, oh my God, we don't want to come back, let's get out of here. Took a look at all the lunacy and things that we're doing to destroy our planet and each other and said, God, we can't help, we're too far gone. But I hope they can. I hope they do come back. I hope they are real, do come back, and it happens in our lifetimes, and that they do help us. We need help getting out of the problems that we have on the planet today.
And I know you're not a UFO expert, but I'm still going to ask you this, and I'm sure other people have asked you this. You don't correlate the modern UFO phenomena in any way to them actually being back and it just being covered up?
Boy, I struggle with that question. I just personally have not read, and I've read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books, most of them nonfiction, and a lot of good books as well that are just hypothetical. And I just don't have enough information myself from what I've read to build a sound case for them being here now. Other than,
and I'm just asking for your a little intuitive thought. It's off the record, okay?
Mm-hmm. What is my opinion off the record? Intuitively?
Yeah.
I think they left about 1500 BC. One of the last encounters was when Moses was led out of Egypt. The god that led him out was an Anunnaki, and they were pretty much all gone at that point. And I would guess that they may have come back in Alexander's time. There's a good historical account of a UFO appearing and blasting a hole in a wall that Alexander was prepared to take a city. I think it's Tyre, Tyre. Some good accounts and stories that I've read and historical accounts. But beyond that, I don't think that they come here on a regular basis. They may have, as I said, an artificial intelligence monitoring us to keep keep them attuned to what's going on here on the planet. But they probably don't have enough interest at the state that we're at right now. And until we either get out of our funk and grow up a little bit as a species, or do something that would put us on a threshold of annihilation, I don't really expect to see their involvement. Intuitively, that's what I would say.
Okay, fair enough. And I love the Moses story. I was at a class, and you do your little name tag thing, and they went around the room, and one of the questions they asked in kind of this breaking up, get to know you little session thing was, if you could pick one person to go have a cup of coffee with, who would it be? and I picked Moses because wouldn't that be so cool to find out what he did on the top of that mountain?
Absolutely, and what happened during the 40 years in the desert, and how the Red Sea was parted, and
that.
You bet. Wouldn't you love to know that?
Robert, we have about 2 minutes left. You mentioned you are finishing up a new book. Maybe give us a little teaser about it, because I will totally have you back on, because it's been a wonderful conversation. So, a little teaser for the listeners.
Well, thank you. And I enjoy doing that very much, Rita. The new book is about the world paradigms that I had mentioned, the two old worldviews, 20th century, the religious and spiritual worldview, and I talk about the good, bad, and ugly of it, and the scientific materialist worldview, the good, bad, and ugly, and how the two have caused so much tension today in the 21st century. And the book is really written for teenagers, although, and that's the market I'm going directly toward, although I believe that adults will be equally interested. And what it'll take to get rid of the bad parts of the old worldviews and make them into a 21st century worldview that will help humanity evolve to a higher state. But it's only about 160, 170-page book with a lot of photography, really beautiful color illustration. There's a new process for printing books. They can print color now much less expensively. So I can keep the cost of the book down through my publisher and still keep the price down. And it's being a lot shorter and simpler. And my first book was a tome, and it represents my life work. But this next book is picking up on those ideas, but putting them in a shorter, easier read.
Yay. So if somebody wants to get your book, Intelligent Intervention, where should I send them to? Where's the best place for them to pick it up?
Either my website directly from my publisher, or they can order from Amazon or Barnes & Noble.
So if they order it through your website, does it come signed by the author?
No, I can't do that because I'm still published by one of the major publishing companies, and they're shipped from the publisher.
Oh, well, bummer.
But if they are on the website, I'll tell you what, if they do, if they leave a message, which they can, and ask for a personal copy, I'd be happy. I do have some at home, and be happy to send them one. And I'd sell at the same price because I'd have to pay for shipping, but I'd discount from the retail price. So I'd be happy to send a signed copy from my home.
Well, there you go, everybody. Thank you so much, Robert, for coming on. I need to wrap up before they start talking over me on the music. So thank you for coming back on, and we'll have you back when
you,
your new book comes out. Okay. That's Robert Thomas. His webpage is intelligentintervention.com. His book is Intelligent Intervention. Great conversation. Next week, we're doing a fun show. We're doing Shopping for the Paranormal. We're having Jeremy Jones, David Sarita, and Dakara Keys on to share their shopping wisdom. And so until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. Thank you.